Thank you so much for coming along to the Melbourne Press Club's lunch, and it's so nice to see so many people here in the room, and especially when we're talking about this very topic, bringing Melbourne back, and I'm delighted to introduce our Lord Mayor, Sally Capp.
New ABS data that I'm sure you all saw that was released last week found that Melbourne's population has actually declined by 7.5% in 2020-21. Now, this population decline is overwhelmingly due to our international students returning home when borders closed during the pandemic. In fact, the biggest declines experienced across Melbourne were in our university precincts, Carlton and Clayton. These precincts witnessed a 10 and a 9.4% respectively decline in their populations. International students are key to our education sector. They're our largest export-earning industry, and they have been for over a decade, contributing $10.5 billion in revenue in 2020 and 55,000 jobs in 2020. But they are also critical to our local labour markets. They are employees, they are business operators, they are tenants, they are consumers, they are volunteers, they are our neighbours. We will become Australia's biggest city, driving the biggest city economy in Australia. But to achieve this, we need to ensure that the settings are right to enable this growth. That's why we are calling for greater pathways to post-study work and permanent residency for international students who complete degrees in Australia. We're asking the next federal government to give every student who completes a bachelor degree or above in Australia automatic access to a 4-year post-study work visa. Automatic 4-year post-study work visa. Equally, we want to ensure that those who maintain work over this period have a clearer pathway to achieving permanent residency. Now, these levers will make it easier for students to build on their hard-won networks over their study time and profit from the abundant experience and possibilities that exist for them here in Melbourne. We believe that these are sensible policy solutions that will strengthen the positive and constructive relationships that we have in our region and provide seamless post-graduation pathways for our students. It will help make Australia more attractive and conducive as a destination for students and allow us to retain smart and globally connected talent and address current labour and skill shortages, all of those things with these two levers. Importantly, it also goes to us being more competitive globally. Let's face it, we've had our borders closed for a lot longer than other markets like the UK and Canada, where they've seen the enrolments for international students up at about 150% of pre-pandemic levels. They've been making hay while the sun shines. For us to be competitive with those countries, including the USA, they are also considering the post-study 4-year work visa status. It's important we're right there. We know that there are other groups calling for this change to visa status, and we will partner with our Sydney counterparts, with universities and with international student organisations to really drive this initiative and see its delivery in Australia. I wanted to say as well that we acknowledge that the role of 457 visa holders is essential also here in Australia with our labour challenges, and we join with others who have called for 457 visa categories to be expanded so that that labour can assist with the shortfall that we're experiencing right now, particularly in hospitality and tourism. Now, the return of city workers remains a challenge. Thank you all for coming to the city today. And we do accept at the City of Melbourne that the rhythm of the city has changed forever, with flexible working being embraced in workplaces across Australia. We strongly believe that the city has a fundamental role as the central business district, yesterday, today, and into the future. And again, our research confirms this, with the majority of CBD workers stating that people who attend the office are more likely to advance in their careers. and 59% agreeing that when working from home, work impinges more on their personal life than they would like. Office attendance bounced to 15% in February. Let's face it, it was from a zero start. So 15% in February. It exceeded November's 12%. And of course, throughout February, we still had the work from home recommendation, which wasn't lifted until Feb 25. I'm confident that when the next results come out, I can see Danny Hunter down there from the Property Council, that tomorrow, thank you, everyone look out, that we will see office occupancy doubling into the 30s. That's the level of foot traffic that we're seeing around our train stations, around our tram super stops, and it gives us confidence that we're seeing a very positive trajectory. We will continue to do everything we can as a city to earn the commute and move the COVID caution to COVID confidence for our city workers. Well, Melbourne has a good track record of resiliency and transformation, of responding to change and challenge. And even in the midst of COVID, the biggest shock our city had ever experienced, we were planning for future prosperity, sustainability and growth. One of those plans included our bold $300 million Green Line project that ticks all of those boxes. Over the next 6 years, this project will transform the northern bank of our Yarra into a stunning centrepiece for our city, bursting with environmental, economic and social gains. It will deliver a continuous 4-kilometre promenade connecting 5 distinct precincts from Birrarung Maar to the Balti Bridge. Think upgraded parks, pedestrian bridges and boardwalks, a well-frequented promenade that acknowledges and celebrates our rich Aboriginal culture and heritage and our more recent maritime history. Now, this concept was inspired by the High Line in New York, which is now the Big Apple's most popular tourist attraction. And we feel that Green Line is going to be exactly the same for Melbourne. Forecasting shows that Green Line will attract an extra 1.1 million visitors to our city each year, generating an extra $23 million in economic value and creating 6,400 new jobs over the lifetime of this project. And that's why we're calling on the state and federal governments to partner with us in fast-tracking Green Line's delivery. What's good for Melbourne is good for our state, is good for our nation. Green Line is a big, bold vision and project for Melbourne. We can't go into lockdown again. I'm in so many meetings at the moment that are punctuated with somebody reminding the room that winter is coming. And after 2 years of lockdowns, after 5-kilometre limits, after work from home mandates, we know that it's still going to take time to change people's habits and remind everybody of the benefits of being in the city. I'm confident that we will succeed. Melbourne, formerly known as one of the world's most locked down cities, is back on a glimmering trajectory into the future. In the words of the late, great Tom Petty, we won't back down. We're going to boldly stand our ground. We remain a city of unending possibilities, a city that says yes, that continues to take risks and be brave, a city full of people wanting to wear T-shirts that say, Melbourne, the world's most resilient city.
I think anyone who's been out in the city lately would agree that it is alive, and we've got the Comedy Festival and the Formula One and a whole lot of other events. But I know you don't want to talk about winter, but we have to. What happens when daylight saving has ended, it gets colder, people aren't so keen to come back? What happens to Melbourne then?
Well, it won't surprise you that we do see pedestrian numbers come down in winter pre-pandemic as well. It's the nature of darker days and colder days, and we certainly understand that. moving COVID caution to COVID confidence has been a really big effort and focus for us with the visitor foot traffic. And as I said, 95% foot traffic on the weekend outside Town Hall really tells us that that has worked well. That unrelenting event schedule really showcasing what you can only do in the city has been important. And our plans are to continue doing that together with the state government, so many other organisations around town that have those events lined up into winter. When we started outdoor dining in October 2020, I had calls from restaurant owners saying, this is madness. We are not an outdoor city. We do not do dining outdoors in winter. This is not who we are. It's too windy, too cold. And of course, outdoor dining has been successful the entire way through winter. So we will continue to push on. We do understand that there will be impacts, but as I've said, we will be unrelenting in providing that earn the commute attraction for workers and visitors.
Hi, I'm Misha Ketchell from The Conversation. I'm just wondering, the four-year visa idea you were talking about, have you had any conversations with anybody in Canberra about that, and what reception has it got so far?
Yes, we have started those conversations in Canberra and there is interest. There are quite a lot of other things on their minds at the moment, and we've really positioned this as the next federal government to be working with them on delivering this outcome. We've also spoken to counterparts in Sydney, at the city, also at the Committee for universities and a lot of the international student organisations. Councillor Phil Lalou here, who's been leading the charge, has been involved in many of those conversations across Victoria and interstate, and we know that this is not just something that will be very popular with students to help us attract international students to Australia, but really makes sense economically for us from a resiliency perspective. So it has so many benefits from one, we think, relatively simple policy change.
John Masanauskas, Herald Sun. You spoke about getting people in the city. A lot of people I speak to, and there's a bit of talk around town about bike lanes who are deterring cars coming in. So can you sort of say categorically here, the council doesn't have an agenda to deter cars or even keep cars out of the city completely?
I will say categorically that we are not trying to deter cars, John. What we are doing is providing a safe place for everybody to come into the city, no matter what transport mode they choose. And public transport is still the biggest mover of people in and around Melbourne. The fastest growing mode of transport is bicycles. Coming from a low base, and it's important that we do provide space for bicycles. I was intrigued that you said there's a bit of chatter. I would say there's a lot of loud chatter, and there are some great statistics. At about 7% of our traffic into the city at the moment is bicycles, our fastest growing, so we're seeing that grow. Our protected bike lanes take about 1% of the entire city space made available for transport. Out of over 23,000 on-street car parks we have across our municipality, 421 of them have been removed for protected bike lanes and parklets. So we are talking a lot of chatter about something that is really having a very minor impact on the space available for cars and what we see as a very important space to provide a safe way in for our cyclists.
Can you imagine a time when there are no cars in Melbourne CBD?
No, I can't, because there are so many people reliant on cars, people that have come long distances, people and don't have any other transport choice, people with disabilities. I think of all the tradies, I think of people making deliveries, I think of emergency services, and the list goes on. And so there will always be space for cars. We are seeing the pedestrianisation or the sharing of zones like our little streets, and I think that's really reflecting the rebalancing of our transport modes across the city. It'll interest you to know that once you're in the city, more than 80% of the trips done around the city are done by foot. So we are trying to improve the amount of space available to pedestrians. It makes sense. They come off public transport and they're walking around the city. We're seeing a proliferation not just of bicycle use, but now we've got e-scooters. I've said another word. We've got all sorts of other types of alternate active transport coming into the city. Public transport is currently, I think it's at about 50% of normal usage, and that will continue to grow. So we've got a lot of challenges on how we take existing space made available for transport and we rebalance that. And the key headline for me, apart from the pedestrian traffic around the city, is that public transport moves roughly 60% of people in and around the city. They have 40% of the available transport space. Drivers and cars represent about 37% of trips into the city, but they currently have about 60% of the available transport space. So you can see there's an interesting balance there.
Hi there, Danny Hunter from the Property Council. I don't often get to ask the questions from the floor, so it's a nice change. Lord Mayor, Melbourne and Victoria has been a global destination for investment for many, many decades, really, but we're really up against Sydney right now, and there is a lot of investment coming into Australia and going to Sydney. How do we position Melbourne to make sure we get a good share of that? And I'm talking about precinct investment, I'm talking about R&D, education, innovation, all of those things. Is Melbourne positioned to really capture our share, and what's your agenda around capturing that global investment?
Yeah, it's a great question. And of course, every city, I sit on 2 international forums of mayors, and everybody's vying for the same investment into their cities as they recover from the pandemic. And we think that the fundamentals here in Melbourne are terrific, and they're very strong, and they've been here pre-pandemic, particularly across some of those core sectors you mentioned, the knowledge sector, biomedical sector, tech, professional services and finance. We are conscious of doing more to promote Melbourne as an investment destination and then to facilitate more of that investment into Melbourne. We call it for shorthand City of Yes. And as part of that, we've established a new group called Invest Melbourne, very imaginative, Danny, to work with Invest Victoria to make sure we're putting a combined effort together to attract our fair share of that international investment. Amazon Tech are coming into Melbourne, setting up at a new building at 555 Collins Street. We've just met with the CEO of CSL reconfirming their long-term investment, and we see the latest project happening at the top of Elizabeth Street there, which isn't just offices, it includes labs and an enormous R&D investment into Melbourne. They're just a couple of examples of the work that has been underway and which we will continue to do. But Invest Melbourne with a CEO and a team will really drive our efforts to promote, to facilitate and to land those investments into Melbourne. And can I just say, I don't want to be competitive with the areas around us, but more recently, Clemenger moving 600 people into the CBD. We've also got people like Joe Horgan making a massive investment with a Mecca 3,000 square metre presence in the city of Melbourne, and international brands like Rod and Gun, Centre Pompidou and Four Seasons all setting up new presences in Melbourne. That gives us encouragement that the fundamentals are good and we need to make sure we're doing our best to compete.
You've said that a lot of council workers are heading back into the offices, but by council's own estimates, about 70% of the entire workforce, you said about 1,600 or so staff, are back in offices, and many of them still part-time. Do you think that that's enough? Is that enough encouragement to get other office workers back?
Well, I would say we're doing our very best, and I think those numbers really lead the way. It's 85% is our weekly average across our office attendance, and add into the mix managing COVID isolation and COVID connection restrictions, I think we're really leading the way. And I'll just say again, every single person at the City of Melbourne understands the role we have to provide leadership on return to office. If your role was part-time pre-COVID, it's still part-time. If you've got a flexible work arrangement that suits you for personal reasons, that is still in place. And some people are discussing new flexible working practices based on their current situations. All of that is in play because we're an employer that supports flexible working. In fact, pre-COVID, we had less than 40% of our workforce enabled to work from home and to work remotely. We're now at about 85% of our workforce. It was a massive investment and effort at the start of the pandemic in 2020 to make that happen. And we're really pleased with that investment and believe that it makes us an employer of choice even. But we are, I think, leading the way on having people return to the office.
Just a quick one. Every other politician has weighed in on COVID isolation requirements. Is it time to scrap them?
Did I have to mention that?
You did.
We will, on all of these issues, we've really deferred to the health experts and we'll continue to do that because we've got a responsibility as an employer as well to make sure we have a safe working environment.
You don't want to have an opinion like every other?
We think every initiative that helps people return to the city safely is a good one.
So scrap it. Is that right?
If it's safe to do so.
Scrap it. I think that's what she said. All right. Next question.
Hi, Lord Mayor. Michael Fowler from The Age. You were talking about office occupancy before, hoping it gets up in the 30s for March, but it's becoming increasingly clear that those Mondays and Fridays are probably here to stay, people working from home. So do you agree with that? And if so, in what ways can you reimagine the city so that, like you said, you actually do have 7 days of customers? At what point do we stop trying to just get office workers back on Mondays and Fridays and think, what can we do to innovate a little bit more?
Yeah, it's such a great question. As I said earlier, we're really keen to accelerate towards that new city rhythm so that we can respond. But this will give you some insights. Often when people are talking about the percentage of return, they're talking about people that worked in the city pre-COVID. What we're seeing at the moment is an incredible level of interest in new organisations and different people who hadn't previously worked in the city to come back into that vibrant city environment. For example, in our vacant shopfront activation program, we've had now over 600 inquiries from small businesses, from entrepreneurs, from innovative and creative businesses to come into those empty shop fronts, and that sort of demand is unprecedented. When I speak to the agents around the city, they say that SME organisations are in the hustle mode looking for spaces at better pricing, there's no doubt. But pre-COVID, we were basically zero vacancy in the city for office space. And now, of course, people are looking for those opportunities. And that level of interest and activity is encouraging. We also know from previous experiences, like the financial crisis in the late 80s that we saw with Postcode 3000, arts, culture organisations, creative organisations really leading that resurgence. So once we start to settle into a new rhythm for what was the pre-COVID workforce, and we understand what spaces, I say even crevices, are available, then we're able to really support more people into those spaces, and it certainly seems like the demand is there. The mix will be different, but that can be a very positive thing as well.
Lord Mayor, I absolutely love the Green Line idea and project. And I'm not just saying that because I'm sitting next to the Deputy Lord Mayor, I promise. That's come directly from me. But we've got a federal election, a state election imminently, both of them. Have you got any promises from either side of politics about the funding for that project? And if you haven't, do you expect some?
The answer is not yet, but the discussions are very positive, and everyone agrees that it's a great project and the benefits it's going to deliver are undisputed. And we've done all of the hard yards on the economic analysis, what it's going to mean for social and environmental outcomes. We've also done some research in neighbouring areas to the City of Melbourne to ask people, do they see a benefit in Green Line? And resoundingly, everybody said yes. These are big city-shaping projects that we saw with the development of South Bank in the 90s is now a premier hospitality and entertainment precinct, Federation Square in the early 2000s. Now at 2022, it is time for a big project like this. And so our discussions are very constructive, very positive. Haven't slam dunked anything yet, Justin, but we're really close, and I feel personally very encouraged because of the quality of the discussions we're having at both federal and state level. So it's going well.
Had you been hoping to see some money for it in the federal budget?
Of course, but there were some good things in the federal budget for local government capital projects, and so we're working with the government in those buckets. So there's some good capacity there, and whether it's federal or state government, as I said, both of those levels of government understand together with us that our city economy, the 37 square kilometres, was pre-COVID $104 billion. That represented 24% of the state's gross state product and about 7% of the nation's GDP. It's absolutely imperative at all levels of government that Melbourne is firing, and that $104 billion is set to grow to $150 billion by 2031 if we get the policy settings right and if we actually deliver on the initiatives that we have in place at the moment.